Hello and welcome to All You Can Board. I'm Carlo and I'm finally doing my 2022 tier list video. So this is going to be split into two separate videos. I played 63 games that were released in the year 2022. Those are North America releases specifically. This first video is going to cover games 63 through 11, and yes, this year I have actually ranked them. They're not just in tiers, but within the tiers I've ranked them kind of loosely as well. And then the second part of the video, which you'll see probably in a couple days, is going to be a more traditional sort of top 10. This is a very ambitious video. This is probably the most ambitious video I've done on the channel. We've had this channel for almost 4 years now, and in terms of at least like solo videos, in terms of what I've taken on my own, in terms of, you know, the amount of time spent, the effort gone into this, amount of B-roll filming, the editing process that I haven't even started by the time, well, as of now when I'm filming this. Obviously this video is out later than probably any of us would have liked. I think if I would have pushed myself to release this sooner, I would have been unhappy with, you know, games that I didn't get to play. Even just looking back now, I think 4 of the games that made my top 10 for this year are games that I only played in the past, like, 3 months or so. So I'm glad I held off as long as I did, and you know, waiting longer obviously helps a bit of that recency bias fade away a little bit too. There were games that previously I thought, oh, this is definitely going to be in my, you know, top 10 or top 20 or whatever, that have kind of slipped further down. So, you know, it's striking that balance. The longer you wait, the less sort of relevant or the less interested people are in these types of lists. But ultimately I'm happy with where I'm at with it. So let's talk about the purpose of doing a tier list video in the first place. You know, most people just do a top 10. Why do I do these tier list videos? Why do I hold off? So for me, it's a couple things. One is it's an enjoyable exercise to do for myself. I am the type of person who is pretty like analytical, pretty methodical with things, and I like to sort of look back and sort of catalog things like this. Last year I did it where basically the tiers are F, D, C, B, A, and then the S tier. Just the kind of traditional way, the standard way that most people do these tier lists, whether it's, you know, video games, movies, books, whatever. But last year, I just made it so that my top 10 were automatically all in the S tier. This year, I've changed that up a little bit, and you're going to see by the end of this video, I'll be in the A tier still. And then when I start my top 10 video in the next one, I'm going to be in the A tier, and you'll see, you know, how many of those games actually made it into the S tier, because you know, it doesn't make sense really if my, you know, top 3 or 4 games are so much better than, you know, whatever, 5 through 10 to say they're all in the same tier. So, you know, might seem like a small deal, but, you know, when I get into this a little more, it'll make sense. Keep in mind, none of these are by, you know, by any means official reviews or official ratings. Like some of these games I'll be talking about, we've already reviewed on the channel. Other ones we haven't reviewed yet. Most of these that we haven't, we will be reviewing at some point. But, you know, my thoughts are subject to change, as always with this kind of thing. I realize my taste in board games doesn't always align with a lot of other people. I actually had a comment last year of someone saying, you know, this dude's a bad source of reviews because he likes different games than other people, which I think that's a ridiculous thing to say. I think as long as I'm being honest and sort of consistent in the types of games that I do and don't like, then people who watch the channel can use that as a kind of guideline to see if, you know, if you align with my taste in games, then you might find more value in this list. If you don't align with my taste in games, then maybe the ones at the top of my list you know to avoid, and the ones that I've written off that are near the bottom might interest you if we have opposite tastes, right? So take from this what you will. These were extremely tough to rank, especially the B and C tiers, because those tiers have so many games in them, each 20 or 22 games or whatnot. So ranking games within a tier, but I am going again from 63. I'm going to be ranking them all the way up through number 1. Approximately 10 or 12 of these games are ones that I've only played on Board Game Arena. And then most of these games, I would say 70 or 80% of the games on this list out of the 63 are games that I've played at least twice. So yes, there are some that I've only played once, but I did my best to try and get at least 2 plays in of as many of these games as I could before doing this list, just to make sure those my thoughts weren't just sort of like based on a novel first experience or that kind of thing. I think it's also worth noting that there were 8 Reiner Knizia games that I played this year. I played 63 new games. Technically there's 66. I'm going to mention those other 3 afterwards. They're reprints or re-implementations. So the reason why I don't really consider those for the rankings is that I don't think it's really fair to measure them up against other games. You know, most people or most designers or publishers, if they were to publish a game and then, you know, they have years or whatnot to get a bunch of feedback from the community, see reviews, and then publish a new version, it's almost always going to be better if it's mostly the same game. I'm not considering it for the rankings, but at the end of the video, when I finished getting up to number 11, I'm going to mention those 3 reprints and where they would have landed for me if they were eligible and that kind of thing. Now let's talk about the tiers and how I've kind of decided on the tiers, and then we're going to get right into the games. So I've kind of gone with the Board Game Geek rating system. If you go to Google and you just type in BGG or Board Game Geek ratings, there'll be a link that says ratings wiki or something like that. And that's the guideline that I've used to follow. In previous years, I didn't. And now looking back, I wish I had, because it gives me the sort of a better measuring stick of kind of where these games belong. Because a game that I previously would have thought in my head, just off of my own basic feeling, think, oh, maybe that game is probably an 8 out of 10. You look on Board Game Geek and an 8 out of 10 might mean something that I thought, oh, actually, based on what I thought, that should probably be a 7 out of 10. Not that I have to follow that system, but this is where most people use to rank their games, and I just feel for consistency's sake, I wanted to get, on board with those ratings. So, the F tier is going to be for games that I would rank below a 5. So, I'll say right now, nothing is below a 4 on this list. There's going to be three games in my F tier. I'll just read what these ratings are in Board Game Geek 2. A 3 is likely won't play again, but could be convinced. Bad. Just one sentence at the end, one word, bad. None of these games I would say are bad, so there's nothing here that's going to be a 3 out of 10. A 4 out of 10 is not so good, could be talked into on occasion. Then the D tier is going to be games that are 5 out of 10. That is average, slightly boring, take it or leave it. C tier is going to be 6 out of 10, which are okay, some fun and challenge, will play sporadically if in the mood. B tier is 7 out of 10, that's good, usually willing to play. A tier is 8 out of 10, very good, will never turn down, and will often suggest. And that's where I was talking about with those 8 out of 10 games. Some games I think are 8 out of 10, but when I look at this, never turn down and will often suggest, that was the deciding factor where a lot of those games slipped down into the C tier as 7 out of 10 games. So, and then the S tier is 9 and up. And the reason why there's no separate category for 10 is because, in my opinion, so I'll read so 9 is excellent, always want to play. And 10 is outstanding, always want to play, and suspect that will never change. So with this type of list, I don't feel comfortable throwing out a 10 out of 10 on a game that's been released like a year ago that I haven't been playing for that long. I think to earn a 10 to be a true masterpiece, a game that is like top tier and is going to stay there kind of forever, has to be a game that the recency bias has completely worn off and I'm going back to it year after year. So there's very few games that I would rank a 10 out of 10, and yeah, you gotta earn that 10. You gotta earn that 10. So we'll say 9 and up because anything that's in the S tier has potential to eventually reach a 10. All right, enough of the preamble. Let's get into the list, starting with the F tier. And the first game up, again, by no means a bad game, but the least enjoyable game that I played all year, coming in at number 63, is Maui. So we covered this in an Own It, Play It, or Skip It video as a review, and this was a review copy. Unfortunately, this game just did nothing interesting for me. It's a tile laying game. The theme is a little bit abstract. You're laying down towels on a beach and you're laying them down in certain configurations. It looks all right, the components are fine, the art's all right. It plays quickly, so it's not, a terribly offensive game or anything like that. But I just didn't really understand who this game was for in terms of trying to stand out in a crowded market. I just think there are better family games, there are better games for kids. Look in the Haba line of games. And it didn't do anything to really stand out, and I played it once and had no desire to go back to it. Number 62 is Astra. So this is a sort of drawing game from Mind Clash Games. It's actually the only game I've played so far from Mind Clash. It feels like it's a game of chicken, incentivizing the players to have these small, uneventful turns and just kind of stall so that you're not teeing other people up for bigger moves than you are. It just drags on. It feels like to play it well is to stall out so that you're not setting someone else up, and I just don't like games that drag on like that, and it just felt like it took too long for what it was, and it just felt like it could have used some more development time to kind of iron out the kinks. Number 61 is Yak. So we got this copy from the publisher. We did not do a review, we just did a how to play video for it. We might do a review in the future. This game involves gathering resources and stones to build a tower out of different stones of different colors. The tower part, which led to the main scoring, was okay. I didn't mind that at all. That was probably my favorite part of the game. But ultimately, the collecting of goods and moving your yak around just didn't offer enough to keep me interested. The one kind of like gimmick of the game, the fog, where your yak can turn around and suddenly it's going in the opposite direction that you want it to go, was good for a couple laughs the first couple times, but beyond that, the novelty of that quickly wore off, and the game just felt a little bit hollow, and there wasn't anything interesting to keep me wanting to come back and play it again. Okay, now it's time for the D tier, which again is average, slightly boring, take it or leave it. These are games I would give a 5 out of 10. The First game in this tier, coming in at number 60 on the list, is Super Fantasy Brawl. So this is a game for either 2 or 4 players, not 3. And in this game, you're each going to draft 3 heroes. You're going to be combining the cards of the 3 heroes to make one deck comprised of those 3 heroes' cards. It has a good concept, but I found the objectives that the game offers, rather than actually going for kills and attacking the other heroes, weren't very interesting. I realize it probably has a high skill ceiling and whatnot, but it just wasn't enjoyable enough for me to want to get to know the characters or want to get better at the game. Number 59 is Dungeons, Dice, and Danger. I recently spoke about this in a Curating My Collection video because it left my collection. It's a roll and write game designed by Richard Garfield, so I went in with high hopes. There are 4 maps in there where you're kind of exploring a dungeon, competing against your opponents. To me, the theme just felt flat. The scoring wasn't interesting enough, and it just felt like an underbaked game that felt a little bit rushed and underdeveloped. Number 58 is Founders of Teotihuacan. So Dylan reviewed this on the channel earlier this year, or sometime last year. This is a worker placement action selection game with polyominoes. The way that the action selection thing works with stacking your worker discs on top of each other to get more powerful actions, and not wanting to go too early because then your opponent will go on top of your worker disc and get an even more powerful action. That was interesting. The polyominoes aspect though just felt kind of okay, and it felt disjointed from the main game. Overall, this one ended up just feeling kind of dry. Nothing really felt like it came together in an interesting package. There's a lot of downtime. It's just another one that feels like it just needed more development to kind of work out the problems with it. Number 57 is Fire and Stone. So I won't speak about this a lot because we already covered it in an Own It, Play It, or Skip It video. This one was also a review copy. This is a game about exploring across a map. You're flipping tiles over. The game is filled with a ton of randomness because you never know what you're going to get until you flip the tile over. It's unfortunate because this game, the embodiment of this game was basically that it was unfulfilled potential. Everything just felt a little bit too reined in and sanded down. Number 56 is Applejack. So this is Uwe Rosenberg doing something different. He's tile laying, there's engine building, you're kind of getting different types of apples and chaining them together to kind of create this engine. There's these timed scoring breaks throughout where you're scoring for different types of apples. You also have your income, which determines which tiles you can actually acquire and place. I thought it was pretty good after the first play, but the more I played it, I got bored of it pretty quickly. So yeah, I think it's a game that holds up all right for a few plays, and if you're looking for something different from Uwe Rosenberg, it's worth checking out. But overall, it's not something I'm particularly eager to go back to. Okay, now let's get into the C tier. So these games I would rank a 6 out of 10, and they are considered games that are okay, offer some fun and challenge, and I would play them sporadically if I was in the mood. This is the tier with the most games, with 22 games, so let's get right into it. Number 55 is Flamecraft. I was really expecting more from this game. I wanted and expected to like it a lot more than I did, and maybe after more plays it'll change my mind. I will say the art and presentation here was absolutely fantastic, but similar to Fire and Stone, each aspect of the game just felt underwhelming. Everything that I was doing, I felt like, oh, I wish that had been a little bit more interesting, or oh, I wish that decision had been a little more difficult. If this was a filler game that played in, maybe 30 or 40 minutes with, fewer components, fewer rules, just less stuff going on, and if it was a bit more focused and concentrated on being a snappier experience, I think I would want to come back to it more. Number 54 is the Transcontinental. I wanted desperately to love this game because, especially as a Canadian and a game that kind of deals with, a period of Canadian history, there's a lot to like here. You're moving back and forth, going east to west on the train, and you're laying down these telegrams in front of you before the train moves. And you put down these telegrams to signify which actions you're going to take as the train gets there. And when it gets there, the telegram is going to trigger 2 different actions on different kind of sides of the board. But beyond that, most of the actions and most of what you're doing in the game is relying on just gaining resources, trading different resources, spending them to, try to develop parts of the territory and whatnot. A lot of respect to Glenn Dresser, who designed the game, did all the artwork himself. There's a sort of historical pamphlet in there, like a multi-page book that goes into detail about all the characters. It's clear that this game was a labor of love, but I think it was just too ambitious for one person to take on almost entirely single-handedly. Number 53 is Valbara. This is basically Libertalia Light. Plays over 9 rounds, plays in about 20 minutes. Everyone starts with the same hand of 9 character cards, and you're going to secretly pick a card, put it face down, and when everyone has picked a card, you're all going to flip them over, and you'll draft a land card based on the order of your card. That part of the game is interesting. I like that. What I don't really like as much is the lands and the scoring. To me, it's just kind of bland and is something that I've seen a lot in other games, the way these score. As it is, even as a quick little filler game, there's just other filler games that I would rather pick. So I would either suggest a different, better filler game, or I would suggest that we just play Libertalia instead. Number 52 is Terra Nova. This is basically Terra Mystica Light. I've never played Terra Mystica, I've never played Gaia Project, never played Clans of Caledonia, and I still have not played Age of Innovation either, which is the kind of new updated Terra Mystica. Everyone gets a unique faction, they all play differently, you're kind of building buildings out on a map, expanding, using magic, scoring points. I would try it out again. It's on Board Game Arena to try for free if you're curious about it, and it was quick enough that, yeah, I'd be open to playing it again, but especially now that Dylan has Age of Innovation and I haven't tried again those classics, Terra Mystica, Gaia Project, etc., I'd really rather try those before playing Terra Nova again. Number 51 is Carnegie. I think it has a few too many rules and too many mechanisms, and very few of the mechanisms are fun and interesting. It's the type of game that will make you feel smart and more accomplished once you kind of get over that hurdle and you get a couple of plays in. It does take at least a play or two to kind of wrap your head around the game and get an idea of the flow and actually start to do well. The action selection aspect of the simultaneous action selection was really promising to me because I absolutely love Race for the Galaxy. But because all the information is basically wide open on the table, you can usually look over, see what your opponents have going, and you can usually pick the best action fairly obviously. It's just a matter of how much time do you want to spend looking over at everyone's board and calculating everything in order to get that optimal action. I really like the aspect of the departments, how you're managing your company, where are you going to put these departments, which departments are you going to get, how are you going to move your employees around, when are you going to send the employees out on the map, and when are you going to retrieve them so that they can come back and work again. But by the end, every time I played it, it kind of just felt like homework, and ultimately the juice was just not worth the squeeze. Number 50 is The Wolves. This is a review copy that we haven't yet reviewed on the channel. There's a sort of Hansa Teutonica style player board that every player has that's covered up with a bunch of these pieces, and as you're taking actions throughout the game, these pieces are going to come off of your board to kind of upgrade different actions or capabilities that you have. And the longer the game goes on towards the end, and there's these kind of concentrated high point value spots, you see everyone kind of rushing over and the player interaction just ramps up, so I really like that too. You're recruiting wolves, you're improving your pack, you're hunting prey, it's very interactive. It's a real shame that the action selection mechanism with the terrain tiles kind of ruined this for me. The way that you can only move around and take actions based on the configuration of these tiles. Overall, it really does limit what you can do, and it leads to a lot of downtime and analysis paralysis in a game that otherwise has a lot of cool things going on. Number 49 is Tenpenny Parks. So we covered this in an Own It, Play It, or Skip It video, and this was a review copy. It's a worker placement game with polyominoes where you're building a theme park. The choices just weren't as tough as I would like from a worker placement game when it comes to that aspect. The polyomino aspect, although was unique in the way you have to space your polyominoes apart and they actually can't touch rather than having to be connected, that was unique, but it didn't feel like it was all that fun to actually do. The Vincent Dutrait art is absolutely beautiful. The production is really, really nice. Chunky components, really high quality stuff. I just wish that the distinguishing features in the game that actually made it stand out made the game better rather than just serving to make it feel more unique. Number 48 is Soda Smugglers. So this is part of the Criminal Capers trilogy. I reviewed all three of these on the channel recently. This was a review copy, and I'll say right now this was my number 8 Knizia game of the year, so my least favorite Knizia, unfortunately. This is basically Sheriff of Nottingham, but quicker and allowing more players to play. I just wish the game gave me more agency. It was fun for a few plays, and it's quick enough that I enjoyed my time with it, but after a few plays I feel like I've seen all there is to see and I'm not particularly eager to play it again. Number 47 is Caper Europe. I won't speak a lot about this one because I covered it in an Own It, Play It, or Skip It video recently, as well as a Curating My Collection video, because yes, this 2-player lane battler did eventually leave my collection. The early game was interesting. I liked the fact that you're kind of playing your initial thieves out there, but the longer the game went on, it just felt like the decisions got less interesting, and overall what it comes down to for this one is there's just too much competition for lane battling games, or even just two-player games in general, that Caper Europe kind of just faded away. I did enjoy it enough for about 6 or 7 plays, but not something I'm particularly eager to play again. Number 46 is Space Station Phoenix. So this was a promising game. It had a really intriguing concept. You are basically dismantling your ships in space to build a space station. So it's kind of an engine building game, but it's also a destruction game where you're taking things apart in order to build your engine. Beyond that initial concept though, the game felt like it had a lot of parts that we've already seen elsewhere many times before. There's tracks to go up, there's majorities for the aliens that you're collecting throughout the game. I wanted to like this more, and as I played it more, I realized more and more that it is really a race and an efficiency game and a game of optimization. There's lots of things on the table, a lot of different components to look at, but the game, I feel like it tricks you into thinking there are more viable options than there actually are. Number 45 is Bitoku. This is a gorgeous game. It's about spirits in the forest, and it's basically a dice placement game, but I've forgotten most of the rules by now. I feel like to get back into it would feel like another hurdle. There were a lot of things that I did like about it, the way you're kind of upgrading your dice and using them to kind of cross this little river, and some of the stuff that's going on your personal player board was interesting too. But yeah, the main issue is just that with the rules length and all that kind of stuff, this type of game, if it's going to be this heavy and take this long to set up, the bar is higher. It has to be a really good game, and Bitoku, in my opinion, is not really good. It was good enough, I enjoyed it, but I don't think I'm really going to play this again anytime soon. Number 44 is Turing Machine, which Braden and Dylan covered in one of our recent Own It, Play It, or Skip It videos. But it's basically a logic and deduction game where you're basically trying to crack a code, and there's different questions that you can ask, and you use these little prompts, these little verifiers to determine whether you're right or wrong, and you keep making guesses. It's a really remarkable design, and I will probably play this digitally once in a while on Board Game Arena as a solo game specifically, but when it comes down to it, this isn't really what I'm looking for when I'm playing board games, so it feels like it's something that I want to do when I'm not playing board games, rather than if I'm playing board games, it's rare that I'm going to want to play Turing Machine. Number 43 is Veiled Fate. We've spoken about this a lot on the channel recently, in an Own It, Play It, or Skip It video. It was also in our holiday guide recently, and this was a review copy from Ivy Studios. Nobody knows who's who off the start, and you're trying to sort of bluff and deceive your opponents by moving anyone's gods around. And my favorite part was definitely the reveal at the end, where before we revealed who was who and we saw who actually won, we would take guesses and see, so what do you think I was? And sometimes the guesses were right, sometimes the guesses were way off, but the reveal always kind of punctuated the experience really nicely. I just wish that the actual game itself was more interesting, because aside from that mystery element, the unknown that kind of permeates throughout the game, the actions themselves and what you're doing feels a little bit dry to me and uninspired. Number 42 is Planet Unknown. This is one of the very few games I've ever backed on Kickstarter. I will be reviewing this on the channel later. It's a 1 to 6 player polyomino game where you're drafting from this rotating Lazy Susan. There's a ton of these different planet boards and the corporation boards, so you can mix and match them, and to me that's the funnest part of the game so far, is just trying the different combinations, seeing the way that they work out, seeing the different ways that you can play the game. There are things I like a lot, like moving the rovers around the map to kind of pick up those life pods or eliminate the meteors that get placed from certain tiles. The way the scoring works with completing lines all the way across was interesting too, but I did not like the fact that every time you place a tile you're moving up tracks. It just felt too easy. You're always getting these rewards from literally just placing a tile. You could put it in the worst spot for you that would make no sense in terms of your other goals, and yet you're still going to move up the tracks, you're still going to get points, which is going to trigger combos to get more points, to get more rewards. It just felt like the game was rewarding you when you might not necessarily deserve that reward. Number 41 is Cellulose. So this is a game about plant cell biology. This is designed by, or published by Genius Games. This is sort of an entry-level worker placement game with some engine building. I don't like it quite as much as Genotype. I did only play it once, and I would definitely like to play it a couple more times. The engine building was pretty cool. The game looks great. The theme really comes through really well. It's just that in this kind of space of a, 45 to 90 minute worker placement game, I'm probably going to want to play something like Noose Fjord or Cryo or something along those lines almost every time. Number 40 is Wizards of the Grimoire. So this is a review copy, but we have not yet reviewed this on the channel. This is a 2-player, head-to-head, sort of Magic the Gathering style or Star Realms or Hero Realms style game. There's some things I really like about this game. The way that you're acquiring a new spell each turn and adding it to your grimoire, so every time you play you're going to have a different combination of spells out on the table. The way that the cards have to cool down, and so you have to time when you're going to use which actions. All that is really cool. But the mana system feels a little bit clunky and unintuitive, and I just wish that there was more variety in what the spells actually did. We'll get a couple more plays in before reviewing this on the channel, but so far I don't think it's going to really blow me away. Number 39 is the Siege of Rundar, my number 7 Knizia game of the year. So this is a cooperative game for 1 to 4 players. Yes, there is a solo mode, and it's a tower defense game with deck building. This game uses the box to play in, so you take off the lid and you're actually playing inside the box. You're basically forging weapons and tools along with your fellow teammates, and you're trying to hold off this kind of siege of, goblins and orcs and whatnot. It's a very cool idea. It's a very well thought out game. It's incredibly tough, but I do have some concerns about the replay value once you get good enough and you kind of beat the game, because I feel like I'm going to have very little incentive to come back to it. Number 38 is Azul Queen's Garden. So I won't talk too much about this one because we reviewed it quite in depth in our Azul Showdown video where we talked about all 4 of the main Azul games. I still stand by this being the 3rd best Azul. This game is a lot like Calico, but it takes a lot longer. Not only the turns themselves, but the game as well. I found it was good with 2 players, only decent with 3, and I don't think I would ever want to play this game with 4 players. The drafting aspect of is interesting. It's very puzzly. I just didn't find it very fun. I just kept wishing that we were playing a different game, whether that was a different Azul game or a different game of similar length as this. Number 37 is Pumafiosi. So this was another Criminal Capers review game that we reviewed recently. So again, this was a review copy, and this is my number 6 Reiner Knizia game of the year. It's a unique take on trick-taking. It's got some kind of push-your-luck aspects. It has this hierarchy where you're kind of jostling for position in the Mafia, where you want to be sort of second highest every round rather than the highest. I think it's fun for a few plays, but if you're not going to dive into it and really play it with the same group, I think beyond seeing what it has to offer, I don't personally have a lot of reasons to revisit it. Number 36 is Sobek 2 Players. So we covered this a while ago in an Own It, Play It, or Skip It video. This is a 2-player only set collection game where you're choosing your tile on the board on this grid based on where this Ankh token is pointing. So you have a couple directions you can go in, and then when you take a tile, it's also going to rotate the Ankh token, and that's going to determine the options that you're presenting for your opponent on their next turn. It has some King Domino style scoring. It has some fun abilities with these characters. I thought I was going to like it a lot more. I think the first couple plays I was more impressed with it, but once I got, 4, 5, 6 plays in, I felt a little bit tired of it, and I feel like I've already lost all my reason to really go back and play it again. Number 35 is Catherine, the Cities of the Tsarina. I will say right now, this game has a really, really satisfying card play aspect with these multi-use cards where you're kind of creating this little mini tableau every round. The theme is a little bit, I don't know if I want to use the word insensitive. I just think there's no need to really highlight people like this in terms of a historical perspective, especially considering current events. This type of video isn't the right time to get into this, but what is kind of being presented on this map, I just feel like, the timing of this game and just the game in general really, really, really could have used a different theme. It's a shame that it went this route because, again, the card mechanism is fantastic and really unique. I would love to see that mechanism redone in a better game and with a better theme, a more exciting theme. But other than the cards, the rest of the game is a collection of things we've seen before, so it didn't do enough interesting. Even if I was able to get past the theme, I just don't really care to revisit it. And the last game in the C tier, coming in at number 34, is San Francisco, my number 5 Reiner Knizia game of the year. So this has a Coloretto style drafting thing where you're either taking one of the options, or if not, then you're sweetening the pot. Basically, you're sweetening that choice for your opponents. You're claiming these tiles, building out a kind of map of San Francisco, you're connecting these cable cars. It just didn't feel quite as clean or intuitive as other Knizia games, maybe lacked a bit of polish. And I will say, although the art on the box is really nice, the game itself looks a little bit dull. Alright, let's get into the B tier. These are 7 out of 10 games. They're good, and I'm usually willing to play them. There's 20 games in this tier. Starting with number 33, Oak. So we covered this in an Own It, Play It, or Skip It and a couple other videos recently. This was another review copy. It's a worker placement game with druids where you can modify your druids, which are your workers. So you can get these kind of little accessories and add them onto them to kind of change the way that they work and what abilities they have. It's not as clean or polished as I like my worker placement games to be. It's good, I enjoyed my time with it, and I would happily play it at least a couple more times, but if the choice was mine, there's just too many other games I would prefer to play. Number 32 is Sea Salt and Paper. So this is a very small game. It's just a very small footprint, a deck of cards. It takes a play or two to understand really what you're doing. It feels pretty unique, and there's some fun win conditions in the game, like where you can kind of try to get these 4 mermaid cards to win immediately. There's some wagering and kind of risk assessment stuff where you start kind of investing in a category, or you're drawing cards from a deck, or stealing a card from another player. I also did think it was a little bit too random for me based on how often you're just drawing a card off the top of the deck or drawing something blindly from your opponent's hand. I liked a lot of what it was doing, but I do wish I had just a little bit more control. Number 31 is Longboard. So this is my number 4 Knizia game of the year. This is a sort of Lost Cities style game for 2 to 4 players with a theme of surfboards. You're basically building these bigger and bigger surfboards, increasing in numbers, kind of like Lost Cities, where you're starting with lower numbers and going in ascending order. But there's this thing where you can kind of give your opponent some of your cards and then steal one back from them. Thematically, I don't really know what this presents. Are you showing up at their surf shop and dropping off parts and then stealing a surfboard from them? It kind of felt a little bit out of place. I did like that the game had a bit of this kind of push your luck element, but I wasn't a big fan of the end game objectives. It's not that I don't like those in all games, but in this game, they just felt like they didn't really belong. Number 30 is the Isle of Cats Explore and Draw. So this is basically the flip and write version of the Isle of Cats. I think it preserves all of the best things that I liked most about Isle of Cats, mainly the way that you fill your boats and that you're trying to fill out the rooms and cover up rats and all that kind of stuff. It gets rid of the drafting phase, which I wasn't crazy about from the original Isle of Cats. It gets rid of the fish economy, which I also didn't really like. And the lessons are a lot more fair now because you can't just randomly see one that you've already completed that might get you, 12 points, which might represent a large share of your score. Everyone is going to have access to the same cards, so if there's a really good one out there, everyone can kind of take it. You have some flexibility in how you can change up which cards you draft every round. It's a quick playing game, and this definitely replaces the original Isle of Cats for me. Number 29 is Acropolis. So this is kind of a multi-level tile laying game where you're taking these kind of 3-pronged hexagonal tiles and you're laying them kind of not only beside each other but eventually on top of each other as well. The higher you build, the more points you're going to get usually. It was challenging, and covering up those kind of projects that you're starting is always a tough decision. You start building towards one thing, but then you realize, I should actually cover this up because this other thing is going to be better. It's a really polished, sort of streamlined design. Eventually the game starts to feel just a little bit formulaic once you kind of figure things out, but it's still great, it plays really quickly, and I would happily play it anytime. Number 28 is Paint the Roses. So this is a cooperative deduction game with limited communication. So kind of falls into a similar category as games like The Crew or this year's Sky Team. I'm not really sure what to expect in terms of replay value, but I do like some aspects about the game, such as the fact that the queen is chasing you and the kind of game arc where the queen starts to get faster and faster, so it kind of adds up the pressure. I like the aspect of choosing whim cards and how you can choose easy, medium, or hard whim cards. And, depending where the pressure is, where the queen is, you might pick different cards to get bigger rewards. For me, it's stiff competition. I'm not crazy about cooperative games in general, and The Crew just does this type of, limited communication, cooperation, a little bit more interesting in my opinion. Number 27 is Arc Nova, one of the most conflicting games of the year for me. I really like the fact that there's different maps. I like the action selection mechanism with the strength of the actions and how that kind of shuffles around throughout the game and how you have a bit of control over which actions go where at what time. But I really dislike the deck of cards. I think there's way too many cards. I think there's too many abilities that are the same. I'm going to do probably a deep dive video into this 200 plus deck of cards at some point. I will also do an in-depth review at some point. It's really a shame that the in-person experience just feels so much less satisfying than playing it asynchronously on Board Game Arena. I don't really care that much what other players are doing on their turns. Everyone feels like they're doing their own thing. Yes, you're competing for things. I'm not trying to downplay the aspect of that. You do have to pay attention to what other people are doing. but sometimes you already know what your next 3 or 4 turns are going to be, and when you already know that, and then sometimes you're waiting for other people to go, you really aren't invested in other players' turns much, and the player interaction is so low. I think players of equal skill playing this, the game will often be decided by luck. The early draw of the game, one player can draw a bunch of cards that align with the base conservation projects, and another player might get a bunch of cards that don't align, or one player gets a couple of sponsor cards that are going to work out early. The next player draws 8 cards at the start and not a single one is a sponsor, so when that sponsor action comes up, it might not do much for you. So I do feel like the game has a little bit more randomness and luck than I would like for a game that is this long and supposed to be very strategic, but it's a weirdly addictive game that I've enjoyed playing quite a bit on Board Game Arena. Number 26 is Next Station London. So this is a flip and draw game where you're designing the London Underground system. You're connecting routes, there's some interesting scoring decisions, some of them require sort of risk and investment that might not always pay off. The maps always look different, either from your fellow players, but also from your play to the next play. This game really surprised me. I didn't expect to enjoy it anywhere near this much. I think it's one of the better of these kind of, if you want to lump in roll-and rights and flip-and draws and whatever, this is definitely one of the better ones to have been released in the last few years. It's very quick too, plays in about 30 minutes or less, and the turns are simultaneous. Really recommend you check this out if you like these kinds of games. Number 25 is Fife. So we covered this in an Own It, Play It, or Skip It video a while ago, and it was a review copy. This game was such a pleasant surprise. It was a first-time designer at the time. This is a sort of Calico-esque game. There's some risk element and some push your luck with which type of goals you want to commit to, or which tiles you want to take, which limit which other tiles you want to take later. It makes you want to play again and try to do better, because you're always, as the game goes on, you're always having this feeling of having to say goodbye to your plans, give up on something and kind of just compromise and sort of cut your losses while you can. Surprisingly tough choices and a surprisingly satisfying game arc for something like this. Number 24 is Verdant. So we actually did a Kickstarter preview for this a while ago. We no longer really do crowdfunding previews on the channel, but we did cover this a while ago. So in the game, you're basically creating this 3x5 grid, alternating plant cards and room cards. You're trying to get your plants in areas where they are surrounded by the right rooms so that you have the right lighting conditions to acquire verdancy so that your plants grow properly and that they can eventually be potted. It's a very puzzly game. There's lots of different scoring conditions to aim for. It's definitely more restrictive and thinky than Cascadia. It's the more advanced game, I would say. The art from Beth Sobel is absolutely stunning. I love just looking at all the different unique plants, and sometimes that's influencing my decision more than what's actually going to score me the most points. It does truly look that good. Number 23 is Heat, Pedal to the Metal. So this is what I recently spoke about in a Curating My Collection video, because I moved this on to Braden, who loves F1 racing, and I knew would get more enjoyment out of this than me. It's a great design, the art is great, the production's really nice, there's tons of content and value in the box, there's so many options to really get your money's worth. These types of racing games normally aren't my style anyways. If I was going to play a race game, I'd always pick the Quest for El Dorado as probably my favorite one. But I totally get the hype for this game. I know why it's flying off the shelves everywhere. I know why people are saying it's the best racing game, and I'd happily play it anytime. I just didn't need to own my own copy. Number 22 is Mosaic, A Story of Civilization. So this one we got as a review copy, but we have not yet reviewed it because we've only played it once. So this is kind of billed as a civilization game that plays in 2 to 3 hours. I think once you've played it a few times, I could see the kind of 2 to 2.5 hour range happening, but in your first game or two, it probably is going to take closer to 3, maybe even 3.5. In the game, you have 8 possible actions you can take. Once you actually go over the rules, the actions are all very intuitive, very straightforward, and the game really impressed me with how easy it was to play. Once the initial rules explanation happened, there were very few rules questions. We rarely had to go back to the rulebook. The rulebook was also very well done. The game kind of has these scoring cards that are buried in these different decks, and you never know when they're going to come up, but when they do, you're going to trigger a bunch of different scoring methods that are mostly involving area majority. You can get abilities and invest in technologies and all kinds of stuff. Solid game, and one I'm eager to play a few more times to see how much I really enjoy it and what player count it's best at. But I will say the setup for this game can be a huge anchor and is probably going to be the biggest barrier to playing this again. Number 21 is Blood on the Clock Tower. I've heard people say that they had a terrible experience with this. I've heard people who've said they had an amazing experience with this. I've only played it once and I had an amazing experience, but I fully acknowledge that these types of, social deduction games, that kind of thing, normally aren't for me, and that's why it's not higher on the list. I was very lucky to have a very great moderator in Braden who knew exactly what he was doing and made this game really sing for us. I think you really need to have the right player count, the right setting. People have to go into it with, a certain level of kind of energy and willingness to kind of talk and, really kind of get into the experience. It can be chaotic, it can be random, but that's fine. I think the game is really all about the story and the experience that it creates. I've had one of my most memorable gaming sessions of the past few years, playing this at a local kind of brewery with a bunch of people from our Discord, from our community here, who most of them were meeting for the first time. A game event that I will truly remember for a long, long, long time. And I think it's pretty smart that once you're eliminated from the game, you're still involved quite a bit. You still have a lot of agency and you can still talk with people a lot. So I really enjoyed my time and will happily play this again, but I don't think I'm ever going to be the person suggesting this one. All right, into the top 20. Number 20 here is Splendor Duel, which is the two-player only better version of Splendor. There's a new resource, which are pearls, which are quite rare. There's a bunch of other new stuff. There's these favors, there's bonuses, you're drafting tiles from a board. There's multiple victory conditions, which is interesting. I thought this game was very solid all around. It's something that I don't think I would ever turn down a game of, but it's got tough competition for two-player only games. And I still don't think it's quite in the top tier for me in terms of two-player games, but it's definitely better than the original, and I'm happy to play it a few more times, definitely. So number 19 is Evergreen. We covered this in an Own It, Play It, or Skip It video. This is a less mean version of photosynthesis where you kind of have more going on your own central board. You're drafting cards to build stuff on your board, sprout trees, grow trees into bigger values of trees. You can add bushes and lakes, which help out. The drafting is cool because which cards you draft determine where you can build, but the cards that aren't chosen from the draft are going to make those areas more valuable for the actual scoring. So there's a really interesting trade-off right there. And you also want to be creating a big forest and chaining things together. But if you make things too cramped, then the shadows are going to cast on some of your trees and you're not going to actually take advantage of the trees that you've, sprouted and actually grown. So there's another trade-off there. I like the fact that communally at the table, you're in control of the value of what's happening. So even though most of the game is happening on your own board, you really do have to pay attention to what other people have going on in order to do well at this game. Number 18 is Boop. So this is a two-player little abstract game that really caught me off guard. I did not expect to like this as much as I did. And it's a 6x6 grid where each player starts with a supply of kittens and cats. So initially you can only place kittens on the board. When you place a kitten, if there are any kittens adjacent in any of the 8 surrounding spots, whether they're your own kittens or your opponent's kittens, they kind of get booped away in the opposite direction. Once you line up 3 kittens in a row, whether that's, horizontally, vertically, or diagonally, you get to remove them, and now you can place a cat on the board. And now you can start placing cats on the board. First player to place 3 cats on the board wins. The rules are simple, very focused, very clean. I think it's a surprising mix of strategic and tactical decisions because you can come up with a plan and sort of try to plan for a few moves, but one smart move from your opponent might undo everything and make you have to reconsider. You have to really plan kind of multiple turns in advance. This one has really impressed me. I don't know if it's something I'll end up buying for my own collection, but it's one that I'm actually eager to show other people, whether it's on Board Game Arena or, ideally show them a physical copy one day. Number 17 is First Rat. The theme and the artwork are great. You're kind of collecting pieces of garbage to try and make your way as rats to the cheese moon. You start with 2 rats and you can unlock a 3rd and 4th rat throughout the game to kind of give you some more options. You can get upgrades that give you little kind of special powers. You can kind of move this light bulb token down the track so that when you land on the spots that are before your light bulb, you're getting increased rewards. You can take different actions that will either move 1 rat 1 to 5 spaces, or you can move 2 rats 1 to 3 spaces each, as long as they're landing on similar types of spaces. If you land somewhere where there's an opponent, you have to pay them cheese. I think it's a really great crossover game between beginner gamers and advanced gamers. I think this is one that's going to surprise a lot of people, and it feels so far like it's a game that's been overlooked a little bit. Number 16 is Ragnaroks. So this is, along with Boop, this is another 2-player abstract game. I guess technically it goes up to 6 players, but I think I would only ever want to play this with 2. But you have these kind of player powers similar to Santorini. You're kind of moving these Vikings across the map, closing off areas, trying to sort of section them off. As you section an area off, if you can get all Vikings of just one type, so that's one player's Vikings in there, the area will be considered settled, and then you can no longer move the Vikings around in there. Once all the areas in the game are settled, you count up all the territory spaces, so literally just how many spaces are in each of the territories that are settled by your Vikings, and the player that controls the most territory wins. Very straightforward rule set, very reminiscent of Santorini. I don't like it quite as much as Santorini, but we will definitely review this on the channel at some point in the future. Number 15 is Wormholes, designed by Peter McPherson, who also designed Tiny Towns and Fit to Print, which are two games that I really enjoy. It feels like it maybe is missing something. It almost feels like as if you took Tiny Towns and you took the monument cards out. I love the fact that you're kind of laying down these wormholes and jumping through wormholes to get through different parts of the map. The fact that you can use other players' wormholes, but they get points if you use them, and you're kind of just picking up passengers and delivering them. I think I've enjoyed it more with each play, so it could be something that I do, think more highly of later. And again, this is number 15 out of 63 games for the year, so it's a great game, a solid game. I just don't know if this is something that I'm going to be suggesting frequently or keeping in my collection long term, but we'll play it a bunch more and we will review this on the channel as well. And number 14, the last game in the B tier, is Orichalcum. Every turn you're basically just drafting a card and tile combination from the board. Sometimes those tiles will have monsters if there's any volcanoes present there. I really like the sort of win condition, which is first to 5 points wins as long as your island is pacified. So as long as you don't have any monsters on your island, as soon as you hit 5 points, you win immediately. It doesn't matter if it was in the middle of your turn, doesn't matter if players got equal amount of turns. And I really like that kind of race aspect. The tension kind of ratchets up as you see people start to get up to their third or fourth point. Some of the points are kind of locked in and can't be stolen, but there are these titans that you can gain by connecting 3 land types in a row. And once you get this titan, it's kind of a one-time use ability, but if someone else connects 3 of those land types, then they'll steal that titan, and those titans count as a point, but you can only have 1 titan in your possession. There's things I don't quite love about it, but overall, for what it does in this amount of time, in this simple of a rule set, just with some engine building going on and these kind of like building tiles that you can acquire, which are really cool. Very impressive game, one that I'm looking forward to playing a whole bunch more, and again, we will definitely review this on the channel. Okay, now we're at the A tier. These are 8 out of 10 games, very good games that I will never turn down and will actually often suggest. So number 13 is Spots. This is a push your luck dice game with some action selection. And you're going to have a different set of cards on the table that are going to determine which actions the players can take to either roll their dice, collect new cards. There's all sorts of things you can do. It's basically the first person to complete 6 dogs wins. You get these bones that you can get throughout the game that allow you to re-roll some of your dice. You're distributing your dice across these different dog cards. Any dice that you can't place get buried in your yard, but if you bury more than I think it's a value of 7, then you'll end up busting. It's quick, it's very thinky, and it gives you a surprising amount of control, a lot more control than first meets the eye. This is one of those deceptive games. It's a small box, you think, oh, it's just a dice game, whatever. Longtime viewers of the channel will know that I'm not generally a big fan of games that rely heavily on dice, but I'm starting to appreciate push your luck games more and more, and I think this one just absolutely nailed it. Like, for what it was trying to do, it's about as perfect as it can be. It's not going to be an all-time favorite, but it's one of the better dice games I've played in a while, and it's already one of my favorite push your luck games. Number 12 is Caesar, Seize Rome in 20 minutes. So this is one we covered in Own It, Play It, Skip It, and Dylan and I have both talked about this on the channel quite a few times, so I won't get too into this. It's a 2-player abstract game that, yes, plays in about 20 minutes, sometimes less. It's a very tense, tug-of-war, back-and-forth style game where you're scanning the map, placing these little tokens, trying to look for kind of which points may or may not be more valuable or more highly contested by your opponent. You're looking for weak points. You can kind of have these moments of bluffing or little mind games where you put pressure somewhere else and force your opponent to place a big token, and then you abandon that area and go somewhere else. I think there's different ways to play in terms of like different strategies to pursue. It's just a really, really well designed, again, really focused, clean, streamlined game. And there's some interesting powers and tokens, and there's even a mini expansion included with the game. I've really enjoyed my plays, and I imagine I'll be playing this a lot more over the years. And my number 11 game, just barely missing out on the top 10, is my number 3 Reiner Knizia game of the year, and this is called Gang of Dice. Talk about surprises. Another push your luck game. This game is basically all dice, and it's basically a game of having a big ego and bossing people around. Every player starts with a pool of dice, and at the end of the game, it's going to be the player with the most dice wins. So you're going to kind of reveal this card from a deck. It's going to be a bit of a prompt that kind of tells you a limit or a threshold, Players are going to take turns rolling the dice. You're going to choose how many dice you want to roll, and you want to get as close as possible to this limit or threshold card without actually going over and busting. So it's a game of risk and reward. It's a game of trying to really, get as close as you can to that edge without actually going over. The earlier in the round you go, you kind of want to push it to the limit a little more. If you go late in the round, then you can react to what other people have already rolled, and whoever wins each round just gets everyone else's dice. The game feels like it shouldn't be this fun and it shouldn't be this good. Like, I kept playing it and thinking, like, why is this so fun? Like, it just seems so simple, and it's a game that is all about reacting to randomness, and it gives you, again, a lot more control than you think you should have because of how many dice you can roll and how you can do these re-rolls and stuff like that. There's room for some really fun comebacks. I've only played this one on Board Game Arena so far, but this is a game that I will definitely be looking to own a physical copy of someday in the future. Okay, a couple final things now before we close the video out. First thing here is to talk about those 3 reprint games that I talked about before that aren't really eligible to be ranked in this video, but I want to talk about them briefly and tell you where they would have been ranked if they had been eligible. So let's start with Cat in the Box Deluxe Edition. So this is a trick-taking game where you have these sort of black and white cards in your hands. They don't actually have any colors, but there are 4 colors in the game that are kind of represented on this common board in the middle of the table. And at the start of every round, you're going to kind of make a wager for how many sort of tricks you think you're going to win or that you want to win. And when you're playing cards, you're going to announce the color. So let's say I play a 6. Again, these cards don't inherently have a color, but I can say it's going to be a yellow 6 or it's going to be a green 6. And once these cards have been played and determined to be a color, you're putting a cube on this little board to show, okay, now the green 6 is out there. So even if other players had 6s and they wanted to play those as green 6s, they can't anymore because mine has already been determined to be a green 6. There's also this kind of little area majority thing going on the board where you're connecting the cubes for the colors that you've placed. This game does so many interesting, unique things, both in terms of the trick taking, but the fact that it marries this kind of board in the middle. And when you kind of run out of cards to play, there's ways that the game can kind of create this paradox. Really, really fun game. I was really impressed by this, and this would definitely be in my A tier. This is one that would range somewhere between probably number 8 and number 12 for the year. This was right in the kind of in contention for cracking the top 10. Next is Libertalia Winds of Galecrest. So this is another one that would have been A tier for sure, and right in the same range as Cat in the Box Deluxe. I think I like Libertalia a little bit more, but hard to say. This is one that we covered in an Own It, Play It, or Skip It video, and we've spoken about many other times on the channel. It ranked quite high in Dylan's top 50 games of all time. You know, you've got this, everyone's got the same starting cards, and you're kind of playing these cards, you simultaneously reveal them, and you're going to trigger the abilities going in one direction, and then you're going to collect loot going in the other direction, but based on which abilities trigger when, it might shuffle the order of the line, or someone might not even get loot, or it might get eliminated, and then the longer the game goes on, people's cards are being, the hand of cards are a little more varied. Sometimes you get absolutely hosed and you feel like it's totally bad luck, but no matter what, the game is just a blast to play every time. And the last one here is Raw, which is a reprint of a Reiner Knizia classic, a game that, evaded us for many, many years, and we were lucky enough to play it recently. I got a copy from this new 25th Century Games edition, and it is absolutely amazing. This would be one of the very few S-tier games. I'll say right now, if this had been eligible for contention, it would have either been my number 1 or number 2 game of the year. It's that good. It's an auction game from the 90s. You're kind of pulling these tiles from the bag and adding them to this auction row, or you're deciding to trigger the auction based on what's currently there. It's fairly straightforward. What makes it interesting is not only the different types of tiles and the way that some score more short-term or more long-term, the fact that, tiles might mean more to you than to other players. They might be equal. You're trying to assess value of everything on the board for yourself and for the other players at all times. Really interesting decisions you can make, and you have these different strength of bidding tiles. When do you want to use your big bidding tiles? When do you want to try to just trigger an auction immediately so you can swap out your small bidding tile for a stronger one that's actually currently available to be taken? The game, I think, is going to continue to reveal more and more strategies the more we play. It's really, really an excellent game, one that I recommend everyone check out if you hadn't had a chance yet. I think this is something that pretty much everyone can enjoy, and again, it's one of my very few S-tier games for the year. All right, two last items here. The second last thing is I'm going to just tell you quickly the games that I didn't get to play that I really wanted to. These are games that I think would have had a legitimate chance of either cracking the top 10 or just being somewhere in the A tier or maybe high up in the B tier. So these are ones that I still plan on, hunting down and trying to play. So they are Lands of Galzier, War of the Ring, the card game, which might actually count for next year's 2023 video because I'm not sure if it hit North America right at the end of December or early in January. Green Team Wins, Oathsworn, Wonderland's War, Ready Set Bet, Mindbug, Decorum, Teletum, and The Mirroring of Mary King. There's plenty of others, but those are the ones that stood out most that I didn't get around to. And now the final thing, which I'm going to kind of tease the top 10 games here. So what I'm doing here is I'm going to give you a sort of one-sentence clue for each of the games that are going to be in the top 10 video, which will come out in a few days. I've just ordered these alphabetically, so these are not in the order that I've actually ranked them 10 to 1. I've just taken the alphabetical order of the names of the games, and then for each of those I'm just going to give you a little clue. So based on how early or late in this alphabetical order these come up, you might be able to use that along with the clue to kind of guess what these games are. So feel free to put your guesses in the comments below. So the first game is a root building game in a cartoonish kingdom. The second game is deck management simulation with a deceptive amount of control. The third game is customizing your odds in anticipation of winter and attacks. The fourth game is traveling across Europe and avoiding using opponents' routes. The fifth game is team versus team battles with 0 luck. The sixth game is simultaneous card play in under 15 minutes. The seventh game is betting and jostling for position on dry erase boards. The eighth game is colorful and combo-tastic Knizia. The ninth game is exploring old maps with resets between rounds. And the 10th game is real-time worker placement that reminds me of Warcraft 3, the PC game. So that is it. I hope you've enjoyed this video. I know it was probably a long one. I hope there was some value in this. As always, I'm open to all kinds of feedback. Next year's video I will try to do more efficiently, get the video out earlier, all that kind of stuff. So again, give me any feedback that you'd like to see changed, improved on for future years. If you like this video, please consider subscribing to the channel. Please consider supporting us on Patreon if you like this video or you like the channel in general and you're looking for another way to support us. And maybe most importantly, come join our Discord. It's an awesome place to chat with like-minded people who like similar games as you, or maybe discover games you haven't heard about before. Otherwise, that's it for me. Thank you so much for watching, and keep an eye out for that top 10 coming soon.